long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it is a period of, like, so much weed and other drugs to use, but we gotta, man. There's corruption in the government, and the cops are wrecking everything, and we can't buy houses, and, like, I don't know, maybe Paul Thomas Anderson's the right guy to figure out how we still find meaning in everything. Or maybe I'm way too high for all of this. Hello there, and welcome back to 6 Degrees of Star Wars, the podcast where we explore all the ways George Lucas's flagship franchise surrounds us, binds us, and penetrates us in the landscape of cinema. I'm your host, Sam Marchioni. Joining me today is Ellie McConaughey.
I'm too really high to pay attention. What's up?
And Addie Greed Merksood.
You're going to want to get real fucked up before this meal.
Happy 420, everybody!
Nice.
To mark the occasion, we are covering Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice, which is a degree 4 for featuring Benicio del Toro, who was also in The Last Jedi as DJ. We're not going to talk about it.
It's based on a book by Thomas Pynchon, famously of The Crying of Lot 49 and Gravity's Rainbow. Yeah, I think that sort of sums it up.
Yeah, this is an Ellie movie, and my experience has been when there's an Ellie movie, there's one of 3 ways it could go. Sometimes those ways overlap. Way number 1, gay. Way number 2, what the fuck? And way number 3, why is this movie so long?
Look,
I think this is a number 2 one.
Yeah, this is... I mean, I don't recall if in the movie... I did read the book after I saw the movie for the first time. I don't recall if they make it clear that Jade is gay in the movie, but also she's not a huge character. She kind of bounces in and out.
They don't make it clear, but she does.
She's dating Bambi in the book, as I recall.
Oh my god, that was Hong Chow. How did I not clock that was Hong Chow?
There is the lesbian sex scene. It is mostly off camera. There's only one sex scene on camera. We'll get to it. But yeah, it's not clear that that's like...
Yeah, I don't think it goes quite to the level of gay that I expect from an Ellie movie.
No. This is not The Handmaiden. This is not, I don't know...
The Lure.
The Lure is also not super gay. There's really just the one scene.
This is not Bound.
Not Bound. Ooh, Bound.
Someday, Ellie, someday. But yeah, so we actually curated a special little list for 420. We were able to find a degree for each of them, but most of the ones that we picked were, this movie feels like it was made on drugs, or this movie feels like you are watching a drug trip unfold. This is probably the only one that feels like it's just about the reality of drugs, and I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I'm kind of disappointed that we didn't have something batshit insane like Howard the Duck.
It's true. I was actually going to say that, like, when I went into this, based on watching the trailer, based on reading some information about the book and stuff like that, I was kind of expecting something more along the lines of The Big Lebowski or Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that. It's listed as a comedy, but there were very few points at which I actually started laughing.
I didn't laugh until Martin Short showed up. Extremely
good use of Martin Short.
It was a pretty good use of Martin Short. The one moment where I really definitely started laughing is like right at the end. It's
I find this movie extremely funny. And
when Bigfoot starts eating the stash,
that is still one of the funniest scenes because it's so out of context. It doesn't. The movie's over, so it doesn't come to anything. It's like that just happened.
Yeah. No, honestly, if nothing else, this feels like it was setting itself up to be a pastiche or a satire of crime noir, but it kind of lost the stylization that makes noir mockable.
I do feel like it is kind of intended to be a little bit of a pastiche of like 70s era crime noir, or not like 70s era, like 50s era crime noir, except it's the 70s now, so everyone's just a little bit too high to actually function. The main character, like one of the things that sort of struck me about it is I had in my head, as I've only watched this once back when it first came out, and I had in my head that Joaquin Phoenix, Doc, his character's name is Doc, never figures out the conspiracy. But then on my rewatch, like, no, he basically groks what their plan is halfway through the movie. He just can't, like, do anything about it.
Yeah, so that's a thing that I feel is very, very strange about this movie, is that, like, there are a bunch of different plot threads. You've got the Golden Fang, and that seems to be interwoven with literally everything. You've got a couple of different plot threads running, and many of them do not resolve in any meaningful way. The one that does, I feel like it's part of like how the movie is structured, where it's like you open up with Shasta coming in and saying, I'm having an affair. There's this guy and he's disappeared, and she never asks him to do anything. In that whole scene, Doc says, are you trying to figure out whether you want to be in on this? She does not answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, I can go talk to this person. He doesn't ask her whether he should. She doesn't say she'd like him to. She never asks him to do anything.
He actually does very little. He just sort of wanders around getting confused.
That's true.
This is a play. This is an off-Broadway play.
It is.
Just people sitting in rooms talking and giving monologues.
Well, like, so to take it back to Thomas Pynchon, which I know instantly I'm clocking myself as like our pretentious member by actually having read his shit. I have read The Crying of Lot 49. I've read Inherent Vice. I cannot finish Gravity's Rainbow, not because it's like too hard, but because it's like 800 pages long, and every time I've tried to read it, I have to stop like 200 pages in for whatever reason. Like I've got something else I've got to do, and I lose track of like the 7,000 different plot threads going on, and I have to restart. And I read Mason and Dixon, which is a very difficult book to read, but very good if you can get into it. And a lot of his stuff is very much just like shit just kind of happens. Like there's this bit that I love in Mason and Dixon where they go to Scotland for a little bit, and there's a reverse werewolf, a guy who's like a wild and crazy Scottish dude who, when there's a full moon, he turns into like a posh British gentleman. And that's like a thematic beat about how like they're trying to destroy Scotland, but it never comes back. It doesn't mount to anything. And I love that bit. I love that. And so I think that the way he writes books, and I think what Paul Thomas Anderson was sort of trying to approach here, is just this like, this character has a lot of internal thoughts and a lot of internal monologues, but he has very little agency over the plot.
Yeah, so that's actually what I was trying to get at, is that it doesn't feel like that's a weakness of the structure. It's sort of like the point. Shasta comes in, she doesn't ask him to do anything. He decides to go and take on this case. He doesn't find Shasta. Shasta shows up again on her own. He doesn't find Wolfman.
He does find Wolfman.
He does find Wolfman, but he doesn't do anything about it.
He can't do anything about where, like, the FBI has Wolfman and he can't do anything.
Right. It's weird that they keep pronouncing it Wolfman. Like, it's spelled like it should be pronounced Wolfman.
Maybe it's pronounced that way because in the movie's own world, we're dealing with a Jewish man who wants to be a Nazi.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, there's a lot happening there.
There's a lot happening there. But what I was going to say is that the only thing that he actually does, there's a turning point in the film where the narrator's voice says, what do you want to do, Doc? And Doc goes, not being able to see your kid ever again, that doesn't sit right with me. And that's the one plot line that he does something about and gets resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Owen Wilson got some closure. Wow.
Yeah. I'm not going to go so far as to say that this movie has a moral of the story. It really doesn't feel like that's what the point is.
The moral of the story is housing should be free.
Everyone should sleep with a hippie, and then
When you back up and examine the film through the lens of like an homage to 70s era cinema, you look back at like a lot of the kind of noir pastiches that were coming out in 70s era cinema. I hate to reference this filmmaker, but the big example is Chinatown.
Yeah.
There's a lot of land grab stuff. There's a lot of the government is kind of passively evil stuff because that's where everyone's head was at. But also there is an extreme feeling of helplessness. Like the final line of Chinatown, you know, he knows this conspiracy, he can't do anything about it. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. And this, I think, sort of took that idea that like the 60s were over, this whole political movement had failed, Nixon's in the White House. You can't fix anything, so try to make this one dude's life better, and turn that into less of a tragedy and more of a joke.
Let's not give Nixon all the credit. Remember, they mentioned Reagan's the fucking governor.
Reagan is the fucking governor. Right, we do forget that Reagan was already fucking up the country in the 70s.
What do you mean by turns it into a joke? Because I feel like that plotline felt warm and fuzzy to me.
No, I mean like the end of Chinatown where he realizes that he can't do anything about
Chinatown is the
plot.
One yeah, okay, gotcha.
Is a tragedy. It is a tragedy. He cannot fix anything. He is helpless. The world is evil, and it is impossible for one person to do anything. This, it's more like, man,
I can do one thing.
But the rest of the time, like he goes there. He goes to that house with the band there, and he realizes that like all of these leftist organizations have right-wing infiltration or government infiltration, and he can't do anything about it. So he kind of like plays it off as like, well, I don't know about that. It's just a joke. Because what
I
can
have
you
a
do?
question. Is Sortilege like a fairy or something? Like, what the fuck is happening?
I genuinely do not know why she is here, and it drives me nuts, especially when she's narrating, because this is like my least favorite form of narration. It's like, you put this narration in because either you had prose from the book you wanted to use, or you weren't confident in your actor's ability to portray the inner workings of their minds.
I do kind of vibe with the narration because, like, I feel like a lot of narration in movies like this, Blade Runner is a really bad example. It just sits there explaining the plot to you, but Inherent Vice isn't particularly concerned with its plot. So she's just kind of there talking the vibes to you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a problem with it if it were Joaquin Phoenix doing the narration, because that'd harken back more to, like, the noir thing of, like, hey, there'd never been a dame like this who walked into my office, see?
So, I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. Because the thing is that, like, she's both in the story and not in the story. And I can't tell whether, for 90% of the movie, I was convinced that only Doc could see her until she shows up in the Ouija scene and she's interacting with Shasta, and then later Shasta and Doc talk about her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, so she's real. She's in their lives, but when? Because when is she in the car actually? Or is that just like him creating a partner to think about the stuff for him? Like, what is happening?
I feel like, and I don't want to swear by this because I might have been hallucinating it or like not paying. I feel like one of the funnier things in the movie is that if you pay close attention, she will be in the car in one shot and then they'll like do a
yes, the reverse. She's gone.
Exactly. Which makes me feel like she's kind of like halfway between like Doc is telling her this story and just kind of like a figment of his imagination.
Yeah, but she's also like a shared hallucination with him and Shasta.
I mean, they were pretty strung out at that point.
Because like he says, because she says, what does she say? She says she knows things about us. That's the line at the end. And I'm just sitting there going like, do you have a fairy that sometimes just pops into your life? What is happening? It's weird. there's a lot of stuff about this movie that I understand that this movie benefits greatly from a rewatch.
It does.
I've seen that commonly gone, like, that's a very, very common review of this movie, is that it benefits from a rewatch. Watching it over and over again, you get something new and bigger out of it each time. People tend to like it more on the second and third watch. But I'm so confused about what it is that I'm supposed to get out of it right now.
And the thing is, I don't really feel inclined to give it a second watch. Like, honestly, it reminded me nothing so much as it did The Worst Person in the World. Another film Ellie really likes, and I'm like, yeah, sure, this is a great movie. I never want to watch it again. Ellie, come back.
Sliding out of frame. I mean, like, so now I gotta find a coherent defense of this film. I mean, like, part of it is just always gonna be, I think the reason it benefits from a rewatch is because the first time you see it, your brain is trained to think there is going to be a coherent plot. There's going to be an explanation for who has Shasta and where, and Doc is going to have to rescue her. The trailers very much played up that one bit of action at the very, very end.
So I knew that was going to be the only piece of action because it was in all of the trailers.
Yep.
And they actually repeated, in one of the longer trailers, they repeated a bit from that in the same trailer. And I was like, yeah, that's going to be the only piece of actual action in this film.
It's not that I was expecting like a typical hero saves the damsel kind of thing. It's just, I guess I have no inclination to return to this movie because I don't like Joaquin Phoenix enough to endure watching him more than I have to. And also, Paul Thomas Anderson, you are married to Maya Rudolph. And this is all you give her. Two bit scenes where she doesn't get to do anything at all funny.
My end point there was simply going to be like, I think when you're first watching it, you're expecting to have to keep track of the plot. And on the second watch, you're aware, like, the plot doesn't actually matter. Shasta is just going to reappear in the movie halfway through without any, like, problem.
So you're not placing as much importance.
Yeah, you're more like letting it be a vibe, which is... I mean, I feel like I go back to that too much as a defense of stuff. Like, I liked its vibe, but at a certain point, I just have to acknowledge, like, sometimes you just kind of gotta feel it. I did have one thing. I posted this in the chat we were having about the movie that, like, I said it would make a good companion piece to The Nice Guys. If anyone besides me has seen that movie,
is that the one with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe?
it is the one with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Ryan Gosling is the funniest human being on earth in that movie. I swear to God.
I looked up a little bit about the movie after you mentioned it, but I haven't seen it yet either.
They're both 70s era, not like made in the 70s, but about the 70s, sort of neo-noir pastiches which play heavily into, like, the drugs and sexualization of that culture, but also feature lead detectives who are completely confused about everything that's going on, and in the end, absolutely helpless to fix the core problem. The recurring joke of The Nice Guys is Ryan Gosling is a private investigator. Okay, fine. We like Ryan Gosling. We all like Drive. Or I guess I don't know if you two like Drive. You know, we have an idea of Ryan Gosling as an action hero, with the joke being he's such, like, a washed up alcoholic loser that half the time his 12-year-old daughter is doing most of the work for him, up to and including driving him around. And Russell Crowe is, like, a reasonably competent person, but not enough to make up for how useless Ryan Gosling is. It's a good twofer, and they have very good chemistry. It's very funny. But the end result is, like, they uncover this huge conspiracy, they report it to Congress, and nothing happens.
That sounds miserable.
It's a very kind of, like, dark ending, but they go into, like, business together. Supposed to be a bunch of sequels, but no one went to see that movie, so... And I do like stories of people who are trying to solve a big societal ill, by themselves, and turns out you can't just do that. You can't strip power from the extremely powerful just by revealing they've been abusing it.
How Gen X of you.
How Gen X of you. I was born in 1990. I don't know if that's...
No, that makes you very millennial, but that is a Gen X kind of... So there is... I have this feeling...
Is 1970 Gen X?
It is. That is when Gen X would be growing up.
Paul Thomas Anderson was born in 1970, so...
Yeah.
Paul Thomas Anderson does make a lot of movies about... I don't want to say his movies are always bleak, because The Phantom Thread is not bleak. Licorice Pizza is not bleak. But they are movies that have an understanding of, like, people's helplessness against systems. That can be, like, There Will Be Blood is about a person who wants to be a personification of that system and ends up being completely consumed by it, being completely without humanity at the end of the film. Or like Boogie Nights is, you know, the main thrust of the plot, so to speak, of Boogie Nights is this guy wants to make porn that the story is so good, people will actually just keep watching after they're, you know...
Done?
Yes. And by the end of the movie, he's just making generic porn. You know, there's this really great scene that I've seen a lot of other people reference where, like, Burt Reynolds, who's the producer of this stuff, he walks into this, like, warehouse where he sees someone editing one of his videos, and he asks the guy, like, well, how is it? The guy editing is, what it be? And that is the vibe of a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson movies, I feel like.
Did they kind of reference that when Doc does... It's when Shasta's coming back and giving her big monologue, and he's like, well, okay, Sarah, or something like that.
I think so. Fucking Sarah.
I think that is sort of a recurring beat in a lot of his movies, because that is, if I had to come up with an overarching single idea, which I don't like to do, to be clear, like I've had this conversation about several directors. If you boil all their stuff down to their bones, it's this. Well, everything looks like bones when you boil it down to its bones. But if I had to come up with a single core idea, I feel like that would be it. The power, the helplessness of the individual against the system.
Yeah, I think this movie does highlight that a lot. One of the ways in which it does it is it mentions and lampoons police brutality a whole lot. And the way in which everyone, not just Doc, but kind of most egregious, like most obviously Doc, is sort of like, it's gonna happen, so curl up and cover your ass is basically what he decides to do.
Yeah, like Michael K. Williams comes into the film, and then he's like one scene, and then he never comes back, but it's just like, we heard you were fraternizing with a member of the Black Panther Party. And so it kind of just feels like it's there for a little extra crunch, a little flavor to remind you how shitty the police are.
Well, they also, like, it's a throwaway line, but they do mention, one of the FBI agents mentions, like, hey, COINTELPRO informants make $300 a month, which in 1970s money is a lot of fucking money.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it is very cynical about the police, you know, which they kind of do a recurring bit about the Manson murders. When they're driving with the dentist, they get pulled over, and like 3 or more people are considered at risk for starting a cult.
With shoulder-length hair on males, mentions of the Book of Revelation, and bad driving.
Right, this was like, it takes place in California. This was also when the Zodiac Killer was out there doing stuff. The 70s were a period of extreme crackdown by police. Negative, in case anyone needs me to say that, listeners, like, I'm not in favor of that. ACAB and all that.
ACAB.
So the fact that everyone kind of acknowledges the LAPD is out of control, they're gonna hurt you, and you can't do anything about it, is very much like part of that, like, the powerlessness of the individual against the system.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was aiming at and bringing it up, is that it's really like, if you say that that's like the director's, like, one of their go-to, this is a thing with them, that makes sense to me, because it's in almost every scene. There is this sense of there is very little that Doc or anyone can do about the world that they live in. It's shit. I was actually gonna say that part of that is when I was going in and I was thinking this is going to be like The Big Lebowski or Fear and Loathing. The thing that it's not like about those two movies is that there is a whimsicality, especially to Fear and Loathing, that this movie doesn't have. The Okay, there is another scene that got me to actually laugh out loud, and that's when Doc looks at the picture of of I forget the character's name, the woman and her child.
Amethyst, I think, is the name of the daughter.
Amethyst is the daughter. And so, and he just looks at it and screams for a second and then goes, mm-hmm. It's not glamorizing the drug use at all. The drug use is an escape. It's an escape because the world fucking sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not better than the world that they're trying to escape, but it feels okay for a little while, and they're all doing it. Every single character in this movie is escaping that world somehow. And that's bleak. Really dark.
It is very bleak. And you mentioned Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas a moment ago. And one of the things that the book has that I feel like the movie kind of failed to really put enough emphasis on is a lot of it is about Hunter Thompson's kind of irritation that the hippie movement changed from something that was genuinely political and had actual goals to a bunch of people who thought that just by like getting high and doing free love, they were just going to win. They were just going to cause revolution just by existing.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is about the fallout of that. You know, we're out here getting high because, you know, what the fuck else are we going to do? And there's also the real world subtext, which isn't in the book, but is, I think, important understanding it, that the reason Thompson fucked off to Las Vegas on that assignment is he was covering a police brutality case against some Latinos in LA, and the Latinos got convinced that he was reporting onto the police and started trying to murder him. And he was just like, okay, I got to get out of town for a little bit. I do think that the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas comparison is very good. I think it's intentional. Benicio del Toro is in both movies, playing very similar characters. He's a lawyer in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, too.
Oh my gosh, I
mean, if it pays the bills.
That didn't occur to me, but yes, that is...
I like Benicio del Toro. I think he's very good in this movie in his like kind of laid back vibe that he does pretty often.
Benicio del Toro, he's one of those actors where you find out he has an Oscar and you're like, oh, for what?
What did he win an Oscar for?
For a movie called Traffic?
Oh, that's a great movie. That's a genuinely excellent film.
Supporting actor, but like, I never see movies starring Benicio del Toro being like, Academy Award winner Benicio del Toro.
He actually does play criminals extremely well. He's extremely good in Traffic. He is insanely good in Sicario. Like, I know it sounds impossible, like watching you've seen it?
No, I've heard really good things about it. I have a low tolerance for crime films in general.
Yeah, Sicario is a rough watch. And he is terrifying in that movie. And that's another movie about, like, the futility of individuals against horrible systems.
I will say that I think that PTA was a good choice of director for this adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the sort of not really complaints, but one of the things that I had in my head was that, like, I felt like I wanted to go into a Coen Brothers movie, but I don't think that it would have that feeling of noticeable desperation if it was the Coen Brothers style of detached, zany.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that it's a lot more like, it's close to it. Everything is close. The camera follows Doc so closely that you're just as clueless as he is the entire way through. He's just barely figuring things out and sort of stumbling into stuff that is related over and over again. And then he does the wall of words and how they're connected and stuff. and then he like stares at it and then smokes up. And as the audience, I feel like I'm right there with him. I'm just like, yeah, that's a lot of stuff. And it really feels like it's all of the same case, but also, what?
Was that the scene that dovetailed into the phone call with Bigfoot and the wife?
Yes.
Because that scene made me laugh.
Well, that scene, I didn't understand what was going. Like, okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and make him henpecked for a second. Like, what is? And I'm not even sure.
I mean, I'm fully on the wife's side at that point.
Do you know how many therapist bills you've cost? Very good scene.
Health insurance still has not changed, so the other moral of the story is Medicare for all.
Medicare for all. ACAB and Medicare for all are the themes of this movie, and housing for all. But like, what was the example? Like, I like that it does that though. I like that it has like, he does the thing that you're supposed to do in the noir. Like you've identified the bad guy and you got the meeting with him, and then really predictably you get captured and you're about to get killed, and you get out purely by happenstance. Which leads to the only action beat in the movie, which is a very funny.
Was there any kind of indication that he had Shasta's the shard of Shasta's credit card before that?
I think
scene
in one scene he is using it to like cut coke when he's doing coke with Martin Short.
What a sentence!
I don't care what anyone says. 10 out of 10 use of your Martin Short.
Oh no, it was a great use of Martin Short, even though it was a little. So upon watching it, I thought Japonica was like supposed to be in her mid-20s, and then the scene with her dad happens. Like, oh fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know how old Japonica is exactly supposed to be, because after all of like her dad is sitting there talking about like how, you know, he's taken my tiny baby, perfect little tiny cinnamon roll baby daughter person, and then Doc actually says like, she's of age, right? And he goes, yeah, but parents never see that way.
The actress would have been 17 while they were filming.
Oh boy.
Paul, why?
I mean, like, that's sort of the inherent hypocrisy of that system. Here he is, so worried about this person corrupting his daughter while he works for an organization that moves in drugs from China and then sells them the get off the drugs treatment program, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's a thing with the system. It's also making me frustrated with Hollywood's system and the ageism therein, and like...
Yeah.
That was actually a problem I was having with a lot of the movie, because this was actually my first Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I meant to see Phantom Thread, I didn't get around to it, but then I caught, like, whiffs of discourse around Licorice Pizza regarding age differences and Orientalism. I'm like, you know, maybe I just won't touch that, and I'll save myself yet another tangle into Tumblr discourse. But watching this movie, it felt like one of those things that would be used in the case of depiction is not endorsement.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's okay that this makes you feel uncomfortable because it's supposed to. I'm like, but I don't like feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That is sort of going to end up being a problem that I have recommending to movies to a lot of people, which is like, I found, and this is not a criticism of anyone, that a lot of people don't go into a movie thinking, man, this movie is going to leave me a sobbing, shell-shocked mess of a human being. So I kind of have to recognize that, like, yeah, I love movies that when I came out of, I'm thinking of ending things. Like, I basically sat there and I watched like 20 minutes of some god-awful movie on Netflix because I just couldn't move after seeing I'm Thinking of Ending Things. And I have to recognize when I recommend movies, not everyone's going to want that in their movie watching.
So I do like to go on emotional roller coasters. I like to be made to feel bad while watching a movie. But I think one of the things about it is that I'm tending to look for thrillers and things like that where it's the ride is actually on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a formula to your standard thriller, and bad shit happens, but the ending you're looking forward to is redemption, freedom, success in some major way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know that it needs to be success, but I think what this movie lacked, at least for me, was a proper sense of catharsis. Catharsis in the sense of release.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one. Yeah,
like
that's
the closest we
better
get
word.
is the resolution on Owen Wilson. I'm like, okay, Owen Wilson and Jenna Malone and their poor little heroin baby are gonna be okay. But like, compare that to something like Nope. And Nope is an emotional drain at times. It's a fantastic movie, but it's also a fucking bummer at points.
Mm-hmm.
But you still get that emotional catharsis, that literal exhale from Keke Palmer at the end. Just like,
would you say it's an emotional drain, or perhaps an emotional disc in the sky that's sucking up all of your emotions? I'm leaving.
Little column A, little column B. I have not seen Nope since I saw it in the theaters.
Same here. I do want to rewatch Nope. I liked it a lot. I am perfectly okay with movies that, you know, that you go into them and you end feeling unsatisfied or unhappy, or even just like downright, like I've enjoyed movies where the core premise was you will leave here feeling disappointed, endure it. But it's one of those things where it's just like, I keep saying I go back to vibes. It really just does depend on how each movie handles it. I like the way this movie handles. It's like, you know, that he and Shasta are driving off. This doesn't mean we're back together. You know, the future is uncertain, but here we are.
I'm sorry. Every time he said some variation of "Are we back together?" No, all I can think of is fucking Taylor Swift.
They are never ever getting back together. But they are going to live together for the rest of the, you know.
Why does Shasta seem to feel like she needs to punish herself or be punished? What the fuck is happening with that sex scene?
That sex scene's a lot.
Is that a thing that was better explained in the book?
I don't recall. The book is very heavily in Doc's point of view, which means that it can be kind of hard to track a lot of stuff. It is very limited perspective. So if he doesn't know something, you don't know something, and you kind of just have to infer that from
unreliable narrator.
Yeah, a lot of I don't even want to call it an unreliable narrator. A narrator who doesn't know very much. A narrator who is peering through the clouds of pot to try to piece together a very complicated conspiracy and ends up failing. But I don't know if she necessarily wants to be punished. The implication I kind of got from that scene is she knows Doc is mad at her, but it's a very non-specific anger that he can't really, like, purge. I don't even know if the story she's telling is necessarily true, so much as she wants to give him that outlet. Like, here is a specificity of your anger, and here's something to do about it.
See, I thought that monologue was in there to give Catherine Waterston her Best Supporting Actress Oscar clip. Tastefully cropped so that you don't have to see the fact that she has her tits out.
The entire
obviously.
scene.
Yeah, I mean, this did have a little Oscar momentum. It got an adapted screenplay and costume design nomination.
It's got very good costumes.
Yeah, although part of me wonders if this was like Joaquin Phoenix's first step in ramping up towards his goddamn Joker campaign. I still can't believe that fucking happened.
His actual first step for winning an Oscar was a 2012 movie by Paul Thomas Anderson called The Master.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
It and There Will Be Blood are my two favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movies, like, depending on my mood. Joaquin Phoenix plays like a veteran with PTSD who ends up falling into a cult led by a charismatic sci-fi writer who lives on it's Scientology. They can't call it Scientology, but it's Scientology. It's an extremely good movie. It is also extremely bleak. It is also leaves you very unsatisfied. It does resolve, but not in a way that, like, that gives you catharsis. There Will Be Blood gives you catharsis, if only negative catharsis. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson is just going to be like one of those, like, whenever he puts out a movie, it doesn't matter if he's got a chance in hell of winning it. he's in that rank where we gotta nominate it.
Yeah. Another thing about this, too many blonde ladies that I can't tell apart.
I nearly watched this with Zandy because he's a big fan of Pinchin too. There's a reason we get along. I don't know how he would handle this movie. He's face blind.
Oh, no.
He's often telling people apart by their hair color.
Yeah.
I mean, at least you could hopefully recognize Reese Witherspoon. Reese Witherspoon was in this movie for so little of it.
I love Reese Witherspoon in this movie.
She does.
I mean, she's fun.
She does great. She's the deputy DA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, the one who's like, yeah, I'll let you look into sealed records, no problem.
And he's like, isn't that sealed? You're not supposed to do that. And she's like, grow up. She's part of the system.
Exactly.
Man.
She's also a distant descendant of her character in Election, I have decided.
You mean ancestor?
That's what I meant, yeah.
And after you're done with the file, you take it and throw it on the ground!
That's another thing that I love about this movie. He, like, just finds out who killed Bigfoot's partner, like, towards the end of the movie. And it turns out Bigfoot knew the whole time and was just, like, biding his time to do something about it. What is the deal with Bigfoot? Like, that was a question I had.
What is the deal with Bigfoot?
What is his thing? What's going on with him?
So
he's got therapy bills out the wazoo, a hen-pecking wife, and this fucking hippie that he's trying to get information out of who isn't being helpful. That's the deal with Bigfoot.
So I don't actually think that that's the deal with Bigfoot. I think that the deal with Bigfoot is he lost his partner, he knows it smells, but he can't do anything about it. And he, like all of the other major characters in this movie, hopes that Doc can, even though he doesn't really respect Doc in any obvious way. It feels like he keeps coming back to Doc because he expects Doc to do something.
Okay, I wrote this down. It was actually about the part where Bigfoot, like, Doc has just killed the Nazi guy.
Yeah.
10 out of 10 for this movie. Includes the death of a Nazi.
Nazi gets beaten to death by a toilet cover. 10 out of 10 movie.
And then the character whose name is Adrian, and obviously I'm going to remember that name, gets shot.
Okay, here's the note. So, like, Bigfoot and Reese Witherspoon, whose character's name escapes me, all these people who are inside the system are coming to Doc because he's outside the system. And they think that he can do something, but they, as people inside the system, they also don't realize that being outside of it comes with a complete inability to, like, affect it.
Yeah.
Man doesn't even really know what a credit card is.
There's also a note here about how, like, Bigfoot is an aspiring actor, and I don't know what that is. What's going with that?
I think.
Wait, that was him in the weird commercials.
Yeah,
and right?
He was in the commercials, and there was a TV episode that they were watching, and he was standing in the background.
I did not clock that was him because I'm not face blind, but also if you put enough grizzled white guys in a movie, I'm like, who that? Who's that?
Doc mentions it at some point. He's looking at the screen and he goes, like, I think he basically sort of goes like, good job. Like, congratulations, man. But and the screen shows like closer, so it's like highlighting, but he's just an extra in that scene. He's just a random cop in the background.
Like he's a good extra for a cop because he's a cop.
Yeah.
This was also, I think that episode is like a Dragnet pastiche, and like I have thoughts on that just because Dragnet is the moment where it doesn't really get enough credit for this in retrospect, because Dragnet kind of like...
It's like the foundations of propaganda.
It is the foundation of propaganda because it is the moment where, like, we want to do episodes based on actual police stuff, and we want to have access to police equipment, so we're going to let the LAPD work very closely with us. And it doesn't really get enough credit for that because it's kind of like faded into a joke in retrospect. Dragnet, like, you see it referenced now and it's being made fun of.
I can't remember if that was one of the shows John Oliver dragged when talking about propaganda, or if it was the one with the fucking singing cops.
Oh, he talked about a bunch of different shows in that.
You could write a fairly complicated, I say essay, but you could probably write a reasonably length book about the evolution of propaganda, how it went from like these incredible stiff
Shout out to
people.
Skip Intro on YouTube, who does exactly that.
There you go, like where you can move from like the stiff, you know, by the book, we're just the facts, ma'am, cop from the 50s and 60s into after the 70s. They wanted cops to be cool because boomers were aging and they were getting afraid of, like, let's be honest with ourselves, non-white people who were in the cities as they moved out to the suburbs. So you get cops who were cool and hip, like Miami Vice, like Lethal Weapon, like Beverly Hills Cop. And you can really plot the outline of police's self-image via the history of propaganda. And it all does go back to Dragnet. I don't know if that ties into this movie, but it's interesting.
We're all like part of it, man.
Oh no, Addie's gotten affected by the movie.
The weed's kicking in.
I should have taken an edible before doing this recording.
Maya Rudolph, why do you have that hair? I'm sorry, I keep coming back to Maya Rudolph because I love Maya Rudolph. I was so excited for her, and then she's just like in this cameo, and now I want to be like that weird stalker person who's like, okay, was she pregnant right now so she couldn't do any other movies? So her husband was like, yeah, honey, I'll put you into this so you can make your SAG-AFTRA minimums.
I mean, like, I know that a lot of directors love to put their partners in their movies, and we support wife guys and wife gals of all types. But I also know that a lot of directors are kind of reticent to do that because you're fucking with the dynamic that you might have with an actor if the actor is also your spouse.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a whole thing, and I'm not throwing. It's just like I said, I love Maya Rudolph, so any movie that I feel wastes her abilities is frustrating.
That's completely fair. Let's see. Do I have anything else I want to talk about in this movie? Would Avengers Endgame have been improved if Thanos ate a whole plate of weed at one point?
Possibly. It might have also been improved if Thanos was going around with those chocolate-covered bananas on the sticks.
What the fuck is up, man?
I love Josh Brolin in this movie, but I also, when I was like trying to sell this movie to people who was in theaters, I was like, yeah, it's the 70s noir pastiche. There is a scene where Josh Brolin eats an entire plate of weed, wrappers and all, while Joaquin Phoenix watches on in abject horror.
Are you okay, brother? I'm not your brother, but you could use a keeper. That's actually where my theory that Bigfoot really does like sort of have this backwards and underhanded respect for Doc comes from.
They're in love, Your Honor.
I don't think I don't think it even Bigfoot reads as horribly repressed.
He does.
Like potentially very, very deeply closeted, so deep into the closet that like he'll probably never be found. But part of that is because of the way that he eats bananas.
I mean, I had the theory that part of the reason, like, I don't know if this is like known to our listeners, cops kill other cops they think who are problems pretty, or maybe not even kill, just like get rid of cops who they think are problems pretty fucking regularly. You know, very famously, after Frank Serpico informed on the NYPD's corruption, his partner lured him into a like situation where he got shot and then refused to call for medical attention.
The reason why a cab is true is because the job is a bastard, and the people who select for the job selects for, and the people who wind up controlling who gets to stay are bastards. And so you kind of wind up in a position where if you are a good person trying to do the right thing and you're a cop, you're not going to be a cop for very long.
Mostly police are enforcing the status quo, right? And that's mostly going to benefit the people who are already in power. Yeah, and the problem here is, of course, if you go to the cops, right, and you get a real snake, then all of a sudden he's going to get his buddies on the inside. They're going to hold that thin blue line there, and you're going to be in a whole heap and helping of trouble.
Well, that sort of leads into my point, which is, you know, so if we assume that Bigfoot is a bastard, which he is, why would he be this upset about his partner being shot by the LAPD or on the LAPD's orders? Maybe he was in love with him, you know? Just throwing that out there.
Maybe.
This was a weird period.
Maybe that's why he wants to be an actor so badly. He wants the fantasy of being a cop, of protecting and serving and being a good person and catching the bad guys.
Yeah.
If he is closeted and failed to be an actor and became a cop, he is basically a reverse Katie O'Brien, who failed at being a cop, became an actress, and is also openly gay. So I don't know. I don't have any more talking points left. If either of you have anything.
I don't know. God, I just feel like I watched the movie, I got to the end of it, and I was like, well, that was a film. And hours and hours and hours later, I was still thinking about it, but I still had no idea what I thought about it.
I mean, I just finished watching it like half an hour before we started filming, and I'm like, oh my god, why was that so long?
Wasn't that long.
Oh, so you did think it fit the number 3 criteria for an Ellie movie also.
2 hours and 40 minutes. Call me when it's like Killers of the Flower Moon.
The question isn't the runtime, it's whether you feel the runtime. I feel the runtime of Killers of the Flower Moon, so I agree with you there. But put me in, say, Titanic, and you don't really feel the runtime as much because things are going and going and going, and there's a pace, whereas with this movie, you're wandering around in a cloud of marijuana smoke with Joaquin Phoenix as stuff just kind of happens.
And it's not fast. There's no hard cuts or anything like that. It's very slow
like the
and
hardest
deliberate.
cut is when he and Benicio del Toro are having that conversation on the beach and suddenly they snap into a diner.
What were they ordering at that diner? Everything in that diner was a nightmare. What the hell was happening?
I like how even the waitress is like, okay, have fun with that.
We get so many health code violations, but the food is cheap, so people keep coming back.
There was actually another hard cut that I was extremely fond of from an editing perspective. I don't know if we ever got an answer. Like when he's in the brothel and he gets hit on the head, and then he like turns around to like swing and then falls over. Very, very good physical work there. And then they hard cut to him lying on the ground with a dead Nazi next to him. I really like that edit because, like, the way your brain, the way the Kuleshov effect tells you he's just fallen down. So when we see him lying on the ground, we should see him where he fell down, but it's so obviously not that your brain takes a second to go like, wait, what happened?
That felt like just the only way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because the camera is so closely following Doc, he gets knocked out. We lose our sight.
Mm-hmm.
We lose our ability to track what's happening between now and when he wakes up. The scene in there that had a like sort of just 2 seconds before the camera flipped and you were inside, and during that 2 seconds, a whole bunch of people in camo stand up, move forward, and then lie down. I'm just sitting there going, what is this? Is so, there is so many moments in this movie where I just sat there going, what is happening? And I wasn't, it's funny because like, I'm going to go back to this again. They describe it as a comedy. I don't think that's a great category. There is a category that we don't have.
I don't know. Maybe it's absurdism?
Yeah.
Much like how like Shiva Baby is a comedy, but uses the filmic language of horror a lot of the time. You know, follows very closely a lot of like shot from here up, a lot of hallucination stuff. I think this is a drama that uses the filmic language of comedy.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sticking with my absurdism thing. It's a very one must imagine Sisyphus happy kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That is a very good way of putting it, yeah.
So I like the idea of calling it a drama that uses the filmic language of comedy because the camera is telling you that something funny is going to happen. And then often, probably more often than not, it doesn't. It's a Shaggy Dog story.
No wonder I love it so much.
Love Shaggy Dog story jokes.
No wonder I love it. That's why I like the Coen brothers. Half their movies just sort of end with like, well, okay.
Going back to the drama with the filmic language of comedy, I think I can think of an example where I totally vibe with it, and that's in the sanatorium that I've forgotten the name of.
It's the Greek word for golden fang.
Yeah.
Right, but there's that man has a swastika on his cheek. Oh, no, it's a Hindu symbol meaning all is well.
I suggest you don't pay attention to that man.
Unfortunately, that's a conversation we're still having. I don't care what the swastika might mean in other cultures, because it's far too attached to people who did fucking genocide.
I mean, like, dude's just straight up lying.
He is just lying. It's tipped 45 degrees. No, it's not the like the Hindu symbol. Like, no, I'm half Indian, as may have been mentioned in previous podcasts. But yeah, no, sorry, it's backwards and tipped 45 degrees. It's definitely not the Hindu symbol. If you are using that symbol and you are not a Hindu in India, in a place where that symbol is expected to mean what you expect it to mean, you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Nobody doesn't know, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So if you know that saying something is going to get people around you uncomfortable and you choose to say it anyway, that's on you, right? So I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy for the fact that the various white nationalist movements throughout history have a very, very strong habit of stealing other people's imagery and especially religious imagery and turning it into something awful. Mm-hmm. It's constantly happening with Norse imagery and things like that. But you can't pretend that it's not happening. Yeah. You have to recognize that the world that you live in is alive, and these things change meaning based on how everybody perceives them.
We're getting into a political tangent here, so I promise not to go too long about this. One of the things that sort of frustrates me about a lot of right-wing figures, you can see Kermit do this a lot, where they will pretend that they don't understand how words are interpreted. Like, there's this really great comic that I always go back to where, like, you know, it's this guy interviewing, it's a flower. They're interviewing a flower who's like a right-wing politician. And he says, well, do you still believe that immigrants should be boiled? He says, I never said that. Never said it. And the guy says, well, you said in this interview, what we got to do with immigrants is we got to put them all in a big pot of water and heat the water to 100 degrees Celsius. And the flower sort of sits there and goes, I never said boiled.
Having that conversation, it does kind of feed into, you know, the systems again, because the systems are rotten in part because they're built on systemic racism and appropriation from the cultures that they're then trying to subjugate. It's in healthcare, it's in government, it's in illegal shit too.
Yeah, I like how the Golden Fang is at various points a tax shelter, a East Asian gang, a boat, and a drying out clinic in Northern California. And, like, no one seems to find any of these things contradictory because power is power and all those things have proximity to power.
Yeah. It's weird. It's very, very weird. It's a very uncomfortable movie, to be honest.
Feel-good movie of the century.
It is an uncomfortable movie that I understand that that's not always what people are in the vibe for.
So here's the thing. What it comes down to for me is I cannot say that I enjoyed watching this movie, but that does not mean that I think it's not a good movie. I feel like my enjoyment was optional.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
So does that mean you are going to try and weasel out of telling me whether or not the Force is with it?
No, I'm not. I think I'm going to say that the Force is with this one. I feel that pretty strongly. It would be the friends that I have that are exactly like Ellie. And I do have more than one of them that I would recommend this to.
Oh God, there's two of you?
Unfortunately, I have many friends who are like me too.
I gotta tell you, I have a lot of trans friends, and you find people who are really into Warhammer and really into Shaggy Dog stories, and like, it's not an unconnected group of things.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting why you like this one so much, Ellie. I am still going to ask you for the sake of formality. Force with it?
I do think the Force is with it. I don't know if I watch it to enjoy it. I clearly found it funnier than you two did, but I don't know if that's like a helpful metric. I've made this point before. I have no idea what my tastes are at this point. At some point, like, I will watch a movie, think this is the
gay, weird, long.
No, not even necessarily. Just no, like at some point with a lot of movies, I get into this habit where I watch it, I feel something about it, and then if it's something that I want to examine, I will watch it again to try to carve apart that feeling. I think this was very helpful for me figuring out why I responded to this movie. And it's because it's got a lot of shit that I like. I like 70s noir. I like Shaggy Dog stories. I like Paul Thomas Anderson. I like a lot of very good music. There's a very good soundtrack. We didn't talk about the soundtrack, but it's got a good soundtrack.
It's a great soundtrack, yeah.
That just leaves you, Sam.
I didn't really vibe with the soundtrack, and this is probably going to go on my "this is a good movie, I never want to watch it" list again, and for that reason, I will say Force is not with it. I've broken my streak for 2024.
Rip.
No, that's valid. It was really down to like whether I felt that me enjoying the movie and like coming out of it feeling like, yeah, I would have chosen that if I wouldn't have chosen to watch that movie if it hadn't been for Ellie's recommendation and going into this going let's like take a look at it. And I watched I feel like some of the ways in which the teasers are presenting the movie are almost like catfishing. It's not the movie that it looks like it is.
Yeah.
But
I don't even watch the trailers because I don't want to have expectations going into a movie I've never seen.
So to me, it feels like how Doctor Strangelove is not a fun movie. It's a deeply disturbing movie.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't make it not important or good. It means that like you only watch it. You watch it how much you can tolerate it. And if you can tolerate it enough to watch it multiple times, then maybe you'll get a lot more out of this movie. And I can kind of see that from the first watch, that when I watch it again, knowing that there are a bunch of plot lines that just will not resolve or that are completely out of Doc's hands. And because we're so tight on Doc, we're not going to see either how they resolve, because like Shasta just shows up again and he has nothing to do with that, or that there is no way to resolve them because the powers that be are what they are. So that's the FBI have Wolfman. And so like it's a movie that doesn't feel like it needs me to like it.
And this, folks, is why I try not to have two people who are smarter than me on the podcast at a time.
I am not smarter than you. I just have very pretentious parents.
Yeah, I think in this one, I was probably more the swing vote. And I think my vote is that the Force is with it, but I think it's a conflicted answer.
It's a gray Jedi
that I have. It's a gray Jedi.
we've got three answers to a two-answer question. Yes, no, I guess.
Oh boy, who has pluggables?
Well, my plug, aside from I'm in this like charity stream on the 20th. I don't really get it. I'm not really putting a lot of thought into it. I think everyone else in it is losers.
Ellie, the 20th is today.
The 20th is today.
The 20th is today. Yes, we are.
Oh my god, we're late. We're all late.
Yes, we are all three of us in a charity stream later the day this comes out. If you're watching it on the 21st, you missed it, or listening to this on the 21st and you missed it. I also have a podcast that I'm hoping to start dropping episodes soon after this episode comes out. The premise of the podcast is I and a rotating cast of 2 other guests randomly select one of the, what was the actual number? 1,035 films that have won an Oscar and talk about it, with the requirement being that one person on each episode has to have never seen the movie before joining in. I also have Twitter, LSR42, Tumblr, Football and Tuxedos.
Do you know what the podcast is going to be named?
I'm currently planning on calling it Podcasting's Biggest Night.
Nice.
Because I'm dumb. I'm bad at naming shit.
My pluggable is also that we are going to be doing something later today, the 20th of April in 2024. In case you're listening to this in 2025, you missed it, but you can go back and watch it. But it is a follow-up to Worlds Elsewhere's and Fantasy Worlds Elsewhere's Music Universalis, and Sam is our DM or game master, I guess, and
I like saying game matrix just because I'm my own flavor of pretentious.
Matrix. And writer for the module. And Ellie will be there, and I'll be there, and yeah.
And frequent guests of the pod, Jazz and River, will be there. And we're going to be raising money as well. So even if you don't catch it on the day, I think the donations will still be open in the immediate time afterwards. So please do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for more information, you can run to worlds-elsewhere.com.
As for me, I will ask that you keep the spirit of Star Wars alive by supporting artists through the Entertainment Community Fund, and by taking action to support anti-imperial and anti-colonial movements across the globe, partially by using links provided below, and by taking action in your community. And you can find me on the wider internet as La Femme Fictionale, including on YouTube, Twitter, and Tumblr, where you can also find the blog for this show. Our theme music is provided by Refractory Period, the 2 girls' one-beat synth-pop sensation. You can follow them on Instagram at Refractory Period the band. To further support this podcast, please subscribe to us on your platform of choice, leave reviews, consider joining Patreon, and share with your friends to boost our visibility. But I'm not gonna pull out the Chance Cube this time, 'cause we are currently a bi-weekly podcast. Who wants to tell me what's 2 weeks after 420?
May the 4th.
May the 4th! That is correct. So we are going to close out the original trilogy on May the 4th with Return of the Jedi.
So exciting!
Until then, stay safe, stay strong, stay beautiful, and may the Force be with you.